carrots to eggplants to romaine lettuce. This is Paul Pachter, CEO of Long Island Cares.
1, 2, 3, go.
Hi, this is Paul Pachter, CEO at Long Island Cares and the Harry Chapin Regional Food Bank. Welcome back to Breaking Bread, another episode coming to you from GVP Digital Studios in Ronkonkoma. And I couldn't be more happier today about this episode, because today we're going to look into the history of Long Island Cares. And who better to tell us about this organization, how it started, than one of its founders. I am so excited to welcome Sandy Chapin here to the studio. It's so good to see you.
Oh, hello, Paul. Good to be here.
It really, I've been wanting to sit and talk to you for a very long time, but especially now, since Long Island Cares is celebrating its 40th anniversary. And if we look back on our board of directors, of which you're the chair of, and all the people that support us, the one thing that we know is that 40 years ago, you were there. So when anyone asks me about the history, I have to think, well, I have to talk to Sandy first. So, Sandy, what was going on 40 years ago in 1980 when you and Harry decided we need to create an organization?
I think I have to start with why hunger, because we grew out of why hunger. Why Hunger started at a sort of friendly potluck supper at our home in Huntington. And Harry all of a sudden was asking questions about, had anybody there been to a march on Washington? And then that kind of went to, can a march on Washington make a difference? And it moved on to, if you're going to make a difference, you have to pick something and to spend a lifetime working. And so they talked about a possible issue. And the three that I remember were water, safe water, air, and hunger. And the group voted on hunger. Mm-hmm. And within days, the people there had started an outline for an organization and a name, and it was then called World Hunger Year, right. And that's why they keep the WHY. Right. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I've always been impressed with the way Harry worked. He didn't just go out and make pronouncements and do things alone. Before he got the organization going, he met with other groups. He met with Catholic Charities. He met with Oxfam, with an organization called FRAC. Mm-hmm. And to see what they were doing, how they were addressing issues, so that he didn't want to compete with them. He didn't want to compete for funding. He didn't want to cover the same bases. Mm-hmm. So Y decided that they would concentrate on advocacy and education, and because Harry had a forum of his concerts, mm-hmm. and was traveling the country, that was the contribution that he thought that he could make. But I always thought that it was important that he was always working with the other organizations. And one of the first things that happened very early on was, as I recall, he was friendly with Tom Downey and Congressman mm-hmm. Tom Downey and Senator Patrick Leahy, and let's see, he was invited to Tom Downey's office because Representative Dick Gephardt was coming to speak in his district, and Tom invited Harry and me, and they were talking about what they could do with the organization, and the idea came up to have a presidential commission on hunger.
And that was under President Carter at the time.
President Carter. So the first thing they did was look for a congressional resolution for a presidential commission. Mm-hmm. And Tom Downey was able to introduce Harry to people, and also Pat. He had some friends in Washington. But he also knew he couldn't get in to the back office to meet a lot of congressmen, so he would hang out in the men's room because he knew sooner or later
all the Congress people are going to the men's room.
And he'd stand there with his guitar and poke at his guitar when somebody came through the door and said, "I'm Harry Chapin," and then he would talk about the commission, and they got the congressional resolution, and the meeting with Carter. Mm-hmm. And there are some great stories out there, probably on other websites or something, about the going to the meeting. But apparently, Harry kept talking and talking and talking, and then I guess it was Pat Leahy turned to him and said, "Harry, he already said yes." Mm-hmm. And so anyway, and then John Denver, who was working with the Hunger Project at that point, was appointed to the commission, and Harry, and then there were a number of other people in the movement who were in the movement already. And meetings went on, and towards the end of the meetings of the commission, the question came up, how can you presume to solve hunger in the world if you can't solve it in your own backyard? And I think that made Harry look at Second Harvest, which was very new then.
Before they became Feeding America.
Right.
Okay.
So that was the original organization. I think there were maybe a dozen food banks across the country at that time. And we think there were 2 in New York State.
There were, correct. Albany and Rochester at that time, yeah. Long Island Cares was the 3rd.
So Harry had to go to Albany to get what was called the Good Samaritan law.
The Good Samaritan Act.
What is it?
It's the Good Samaritan Act.
Good Samaritan Act.
Covers making donations of food.
And liability, possibilities, and so forth. And this, to me, is really an important part of the story of Long Island Cares. He came back to Long Island, and like other things that he did, he rounded up a community of support. And I wish I had a list. I've looked and looked to see if I could find something to cover that list. But it was a cross-section of the community. It was churches, different denominations. It was groups like the League of Women's Voters and the Red Cross and Salvation Army, and all looking for support, getting letters of support. And then to open with financial support, he got $25,000 from Nassau County, $25,000 from Suffolk County, and some of the organizations had said that you have to show charitable support, financial support, and there was something called the Long Island Charities Annual Golf Classic, which isn't around anymore, but every year they chose an organization to be the recipient of their funds, and Harry prevailed upon them to choose the new Long Island Cares, and so they donated $25,000, and that was how the opening came about.
And the governor at the time, was it Hugh Carey or Mario Cuomo? I can't recall in 1980.
I think it was Hugh Carey.
He gave Harry and you and the board of Long Island Cares 2 buildings on the grounds of Pilgrim Psychiatric Center to open up Long Island.
Donated that building, that piece.
And that's where it started.
Yeah, and I think actually there were probably some of Harry's business friends on Long Island who had probably helped him with that connection.
I've heard stories over the years. I've met people who met Harry in 1980, 1979, when you were both in the forefront of this and developing Long Island Cares. And the one thing they all said to me, and they continue to say to me, is you could never say no to Harry Chapin. If you said no to Harry Chapin, he would grab you by the collar and he wouldn't let you go until you made the donation. And look at all the donations that he was able to get, and look where we are 40 years later. Do you recall in 1980, were there any obstacles that you encountered to opening up Long Island Cares? Any opposition, any difficulty getting it off the ground?
I don't remember any at all, but it was very small at that point, and also Harry had been working in the community at that time, building arts organizations, and so he had some solid friends who were helping him, who were heads of other community organizations like Lilco.
Oh, okay. Sure.
And they were earlier on a board and gave support for business support and organizational support. And some of the original staff were people who came from Why Hunger, which I think was located in Mineola. It was on Long Island at that point.
Oh, okay. I didn't realize that.
So they were familiar with the community and the issue.
You know, one of the things that I often talk to people about, we talk a lot today about corporate social responsibility and the responsibility of businesses to look at the greater good, the social welfare of where they conduct their business. And Harry was clearly in the forefront of this before it was in vogue, to be able to bring together corporations, businesses, and talk to them about making a commitment to help feed the hungry in their own backyard. That really was unprecedented 40 years ago. I mean, today, of course, we talk about corporate social responsibility every opportunity we get, but I don't know if he realized 4 decades ago that what he was doing was laying the framework for what decades ahead would become something that the world talks about. You know, the fact that it's wonderful to have nonprofit organizations doing good work, but without the support of the corporate community, the business community, to help sustain them, it wouldn't, it wouldn't be as successful. We have about 2 minutes left to this episode. I really have to ask you, for both you and for Harry, where did this passion for hunger come from?
There's something else. Harry had been hired by Jim Lipscomb, who was a documentary filmmaker, to make a film for the World Bank to show how World Bank funds were being used in Ethiopia. So he traveled around Ethiopia, and he learned a lot about hunger and poverty. Okay. Also, he and I took a trip to Dominican Republic and Haiti and visited the Albert Schweitzer Hospital and saw firsthand kwashiorkor and 4-year-olds who were the size of 8-month-old infants from malnutrition and starvation. So he already had experience and interest.
That's something I did not know.
But I think one of the things, though, that I think appealed to supporters when he was going around raising funds was that he said that there will always be short-term emergency food needs, but what we need to do is create long-term self-reliance. And he said this organization is going to build programs in the community for self-reliance. And of course, we still have short and long-term emergency food needs.
That's amazing. I have so many more questions to ask you that I will ask you in our next episode because you're giving us a great history lesson of an organization that so many people refer to on Long Island as historic. My guest today on Breaking Bread is Sandy Chapin, Mrs. Harry Chapin, but also the chairperson of the Board of Directors of Long Island Cares. If you like what you're watching right here on YouTube, please subscribe to our channel. Until next time, this is Paul Pachter, CEO at Long Island Cares. We'll see you back on Breaking Bread right here.